Good evening and welcome to Cooperative Vermont. I'm Matt Cropp.
And I'm Eric Davis.
And we're coming to you tonight from VCAM Studios in Burlington, Vermont, Channel 15, this September 8th, 2013. We've got a few items of co-op news for you and a short video, and then we'll be having an interview with Molly O'Brien, who's the I believe board president of the City Market Onion River Co-op, and is also on the board of the Neighboring Food Co-op Association, which just had its annual meeting yesterday. So we'll be getting some history of the association and discussion kind of whether the takeaways from this latest gathering of food co-op people from around New England. But first, the news.
First up in co-op news is some great coverage that a local credit union got in the popular press this past week. North Country Federal Credit Union participated in an effort of credit unions and community banks to sort of show the difference of local financial institutions. And North Country gave away $20 of free gas to the first 200 customers at a gas station in Colchester. And they got some great press on WCAX.
And this was part of kind of a larger thing with a lot of credit unions doing this sort of thing as outreach, kind of. You mentioned that there's some mention of this from CUNA?
Yeah, there was. I'm not sure the extent in terms of numbers, but it was definitely an organized sort of campaign across the country.
And this comes at a time also when credit unions are really pushing for visibility because of the Don't Tax My Credit Union campaign that's going on. So we've got another Don't Tax Tuesday,
right?
This Tuesday that we'll be putting out. I think our last episode was all about about this campaign. That's part of the long-running conflict between credit unions and banks. So if you want to dig into that issue a little bit, you can go on our YouTube channel and check out what is listed as episode 19, although technically we just found out it might be episode 20. But yeah, so then also the NFCA as we mentioned, had its annual meeting, and so we'll be getting into that. But we've got a couple of events coming up too that should be good for cooperators. First of all, on this coming Tuesday, the 10th of September, there will be the latest edition of Co-op Happy Hour, which is a gathering of cooperators from different sectors to eat pizza, sip on some cold beverages, and talk about co-ops. So This time it will be at the Laboratory B Hackerspace in downtown Burlington. There's an event on our Facebook page that has a link to how to get there, but it will be from 6 to 8 p.m. Might run a little later. We'll see, depending on how people are feeling. But should start at 6, and it will feature a couple folks who are coming actually from Japan, some students to study the solidarity economy and cooperative economy in Vermont. And there'll be a short presentation as well from one of the members of the Hackerspace, kind of about the Hackerspace model, which is kind of a democratic kind of collective workspace.
And they were 2 episodes ago, so if you want to know more about the Hackerspace,
we got that covered
on the
as well.
YouTube channel.
So that should be a good chance to either if you're really interested in co-ops or just want to learn about the model or kind of hear from what people in other co-op sectors are doing, stop in. Yeah,
and both our 2 upcoming events have an international flavor to them, which is really cool. You mentioned the students the folks visiting from Japan. The event after that on October 15th will have a group of folks up from Mexico. It's part of New Economy Week. It's called Democratizing the New Economy, Perspectives from Mexico and Vermont, and it'll focus on the cooperative sectors in Vermont and in Mexico.
And there should be, there's been talk of there being an announcement also from this group of worker co-ops in Vermont that will be happening at that event about the formation potentially of a kind of Northern Vermont Worker Co-op Federation. And then the folks from Mexico will be part of the FAT, which is a Mexican kind of labor federation. They're touring as guests of the UE union. And there's one person who I believe is kind of associated with the credit union sector. There's another one who's associated with this kind of what has been described to me as kind of a mini Mondragon sort of integrated cooperative project that they have. So it's kind of a labor organization, but that has a very strong kind of cooperative wing to it that is doing a lot of really cool work. So that will be, we don't have an exact location, I think, nailed down as of yet, but it's going to be one of 2 elementary schools in Burlington. Cafeteria is the space that's going to be used. So once we have that information, we'll be able to throw it up on our Cooperative Vermont Facebook page, and then we'll have another episode between now and then, so we'll be able to give more details as they emerge. But the planning so far has been going pretty well for that. Mm-hmm. And then finally, before we get to the interview, we've got a short video from State Auditor Doug Hoffer that was produced by the CDS Consulting Co-op, of which Michael Healy is a friend of the show and member of, and very involved in many co-ops around the Burlington area. But they produced a short video of Doug Hoffer kind of talking about particularly food co-ops, which will be a good segue into our interview. So enjoy, and we'll see you shortly.
Hi, my name is Doug Hoffer, and while I am the Vermont State Auditor, I'm not here in that capacity. I had the good fortune a few years back to work with a group of food co-ops in northern New England. It was a great experience. I enjoyed the work, and they've asked me to say a few words, not so much about the findings of our work, but about some of the things that flowed from it, and I'm happy to do that. Co-ops are an integral part of the growing effort to remake the food system. And this is no small matter, because it challenges so many aspects of the status quo, including, for example, the notion that competition rather than cooperation is the source of innovation, and that a rigid division of labor and hierarchical work environment are the most effective ways to organize work, and that the cost of externality should be borne by society rather than the cost built into the prices at the cash register. All of these assumptions are undermined by the work of the co-ops. I know some of you may have questions from members and others in the community about, why does it matter that we grow co-op jobs as opposed to jobs in the supermarket? Well, as we all know, there are some very positive aspects and outcomes from such growth. For example, as we learned in our work here in New England, co-op workers are much more likely to work full-time. And for this and other reasons, co-op wages are significantly higher than median wages for the same jobs in supermarkets and big boxes. And that's obviously good news for the workers themselves, but there are other benefits. In addition, various forms of workplace democracy practiced in the co-ops provide workers with opportunities to gain valuable skills. And finally, back to higher wages, they tend to reduce the need for public assistance, which takes pressure off taxpayers who would otherwise subsidize low-wage employers, which is kind of a no-brainer. Other people ask, why does it matter that we sell, or that you, the food co-ops themselves, sell so many local products? What difference does it make? Well, they may not understand that buying local has powerful multiplier effects from recirculating money in the local economy. And for this reason, reducing leakage of local dollars is beneficial to the entire community. Indeed, a dollar retained from import substitution, which is what this is no different than a value of a dollar earned from exports. Increasing or reestablishing economic and other connections and relationships between urban and rural communities is essential to the health of both. Buying from local suppliers gives co-ops more control over production methods by farmers and other food producers, and consumers have no control over such policies at supermarkets and big box stores, as we know. Co-ops buy directly from farmers in many cases who can avoid middlemen and earn more for their efforts, which they then invest and spend in the local economy. Consumers often have opportunities to get to know local producers, and I think this has value, although we didn't document it here, because folks who have a better understanding of the food system are probably more likely to support enlightened public policies about land use and water quality, energy, and so forth. And finally, planning and collaboration between co-ops and farmers can reduce risk for the farmers, which improves the likelihood of their success, which at a time when small farms are dying all over the place, we need. You may have conversations with elected officials, members of the Chamber of Commerce, neighboring businesses, and they don't really understand necessarily the value of co-ops, but there are some things you can educate them about. For example, we have decades of experience and research and findings to the extent that locally owned businesses are much more likely to spend money buying goods and services in the community as opposed to chain stores. And as noted above, the retention of money in the community has important and measurable economic and fiscal benefits, such as jobs and taxes. And again, increased integration of urban and rural economies can lead to greater cooperation on a regional basis for important regional issues such as land use, infrastructure, education, and the environment. And the growth or retention of open space for farming in or near urban areas is obviously going to improve the quality of life for everyone. Among other causes, the existing food system, I think it's fair to say, has resulted in an epidemic of obesity, which in turn has led to large increases in the incidence of diabetes. And in addition to the personal tragedies, there are enormous added health costs as a result, and they are borne primarily by taxpayers. Community leaders could work with co-ops on focusing on healthy food and healthy living, which are a key part of their mission. So I think in the end, it's not an exaggeration to say that co-ops tend to increase wealth in ways that are essential to healthy communities. For example, co-ops promote individual capital, in this case physical health, through the sale of natural and organic food products. And by their nature, co-ops promote social capital, which is very important and often neglected or not measured. They also promote enhanced natural capital through their support of sustainable farming practices and food production generally. And they also promote intellectual capital by supporting innovation in food production, distribution, and processing. So this is just a small part of the great story that food co-ops have to tell. I celebrate your work, and I wish you well.
It was a short video from State Auditor Doug Hoffer talking up the benefits of co-ops, and particularly food co-ops. And who better to talk about that with than Molly O'Brien of the City Market Board and the Board of the Neighboring Food Co-op Association. Welcome, Molly.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming. So do you want to give us a little, before we dive into sort of the work of the NFCA, do you want to give us a little background as to like how you came into the cooperative world?
Sure. Well, I guess we could start way back with my parents. When I was growing up on the coast of Maine, near Rockland, Maine, my parents were actually both members of the Good Turn Co-op in Maine. So, you know, I joke that I grew up playing in the bulk bins. And then, you know, many, many years later, after I had graduated from college, I joined the co-op in the town that I was living in at the time, and have been involved in co-ops one way or the other ever since.
And then how did you end up sort of starting to get involved with the Neighboring Food Co-op Association?
Well, the first time that I was on a board of directors of a co-op was the Franklin Community Co-op in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And so I first heard of NFCA when I was with Greenfield. And at that time, NFCA sort of grew out of co-op leaders, primarily some of the general managers of co-ops up and down the Connecticut River Valley, talking to each other, you know, whether it was Brattleboro and Greenfield or Montpelier and Burlington, just talking about, you know, sort of what they had in common, what co-ops were facing in terms of local food and relationships with farmers and producers. And in sort of an organic process, these informal conversations became a little bit more formal. More people started getting invited to participate, and somewhere along the way it was, hey, we should really make this an association or a more formal network of co-ops. And so I think it was 2006, 2007 when I first got involved, and that was really kind of when NFCA was beginning to formalize itself a little bit.
And so that kind of coordination or sort of informal information exchange that was happening? Kind of what, as it formalized, kind of what roles have kind of boiled down to that's really sort of the purpose of the association?
Well, I think the purpose is really to look at the regional cooperative economy and to look at the food system kind of throughout New England. At first, it was sort of the Connecticut River Valley, and then we keep growing and keep inviting more people to join us. But the purpose is really about looking at what a network of food co-ops can do to have an impact on a sustainable food system, and looking at the types of things that might be kind of beyond the scope of any one individual co-op. And also, looking at those places where there is a lot of overlap, or there's a lot of opportunity for sort of a regional network to accomplish some things that's for the good of everyone.
So what does that network look like now, presently, and what has the growth how has the growth occurred?
Well, I think as of 2007, I believe there were 17 member co-ops, and now we're 30, or I've heard some people say a little over 30, and the number is a little squishy because there's been just an explosion of startup co-ops and new co-ops opening or incorporating in New England. And so in recent time, the NFCA has really had a very strong role in supporting these startup co-ops and small co-ops. Some co-ops have been around for a long time, but they just have remained small, in most cases by design. But really just helping new co-ops get going, supporting the cooperative model as a viable business model that is really going to strengthen the food system as well. We're looking at sort of some larger projects that we can undertake together. One of those has been our, we call it the Farm to Freezer program, and it's a frozen food or frozen vegetable project that we've done sort of a 2-year pilot of, where we're working with a producer to distribute frozen food to all these different co-ops. So that would be like one NFCA branded product. Have you been working on that with Deep Root Organic? Yes, yeah, Deep Root has been involved, and Sunrise Orchards was sort of our original partner in terms of having the freezer space and the trucks to really facilitate that. But Deep Root has been a great partner in that project, and we've really enjoyed working with them because they are a cooperative.
So one thing you brought up was this kind of wave of startup co-ops that's happening. So what role? There's several institutions that can kind of provide different forms of support to groups that are interested in starting a co-op. But what are the sorts of supports that NFCA kind of offers to people who are embarking on that journey?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of networking. I think it's a lot of just kind of connecting people to each other and saying, hey, you have some questions about what you should be looking at in terms of freezer equipment, or how do I set up a really good point of sale system, or just all of these details that can drive a new general manager crazy, and just like it's really overwhelming trying to get a store open and running and planning for success. And because in New England we're blessed with a lot of food co-ops, and many of them have been around. There's a lot of them are kind of 60s and 70s opening. We have the Hanover Food Co-op, which has been around since the 40s. So there's a lot of information, and NFCA has really been very good about just connecting co-ops to each other. saying, oh, hey, you should call so-and-so, or, maybe, these guys have gone through a similar challenge in the last couple of years, maybe you should talk to them. So there's been that just kind of logistical and brain power support. There's been some, some of that has translated into financial support as well. And really just, I think what we keep hearing from our startup members is that just having someone who's kind of helping them connect the dots, and a place that they can go with their questions, or ideas about how to really engage new members when you don't have a storefront yet for people to unify around. So it's a lot. What NFCA does is a lot about connecting the dots, pooling our collective knowledge and resources, and just looking for ways we can all kind of work together. And
when thinking about the pooling of those resources, kind of like how's the NFCA actually sort of structured? Like, is it do co-ops? Are individual members are there set dues? Or are they prorated by size? Like, what's the landscape there?
So NFCA is a cooperative, and its members are different co-ops. So right now, I said we have about 30 members, member food co-ops. And there is a due structure. It does have to do with size and annual sales, and there are different steps. So you're paying dues to NFCA based on your sales. And there's also the opportunity to be an associate member, which some of our startups are, and that's a pretty minimal annual fee. And then we also have other organizations that might be associate members, that they're not necessarily cooperative, but they do have a similar mission. It makes sense for us to really partner with them, and they might join NFCA as an associate.
Well, you mentioned some of the time periods that have seen growth in food co-ops, after the Great Depression in the 60s and 70s. And we've been following on the show the growth or the establishment of Granite City Grocery and Morrisville Co-op. What are your impressions on what's driving the growth in co-op food sector currently?
Yeah, well, I think, just a lot of the events of the past few years, what's been happening in the economy, like a increased mistrust of big banks, and a lot of food scares. It has all, I think, kind of worked towards a lot of people looking at the cooperative model again, especially around food co-ops, around the idea that when you're getting your groceries from a food co-op, the members own it. It's inherently rooted in the community. They can't just pick up and move because corporate headquarters somewhere else made that decision. So I think there's really, in the last few years, been a huge appeal to that. Like, it's local, we own it, we know where it's coming from, and so I think that that's a big appeal. I think certainly the UN and the 2012 year of the cooperative, I think a lot of the co-ops that were already up and running really tried to take advantage of that momentum. And so I think that really there was, a lot of people were expressing a goal of sort of if we're talking about like the first and second wave of co-ops, that really making 2011, 2012, 2013 sort of a third wave. And I think we are seeing that, not just in New England, but nationally. There have been a lot of startups opening, and has prompted a new initiative of the National Co-op Grocers Association, of the Food Co-op Initiative, which is an initiative specifically designed to kind of fast track that process of helping startups get up and running.
So one thing that that when thinking about co-ops, that's always sort of been a tension, like in the credit union movement, you see this is big institution, like larger scale institutions and smaller scale institutions, and it sounds like the Neighborhood Food Co-op Association has the Hanover Co-op, which has multiple stores, and then probably some fairly small ones you mentioned as well. Sort of does the size mean that like they engage with it differently, or do they have different priorities for the association, or what's the relationship between the large and the small co-ops in that framework?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say that there are some differences in how they would engage with the NFCA, because you're looking for different things when you are X million in sales and have 4 stores than when you're just struggling to get to the $1 or $2 million mark. So I think being a member of NFCA can be a critical benefit to all of our member co-ops, regardless of size. But what Hanover Food Co-op is getting out of it is very different than what Granite City Grocery is getting out of it. But the goal of our organization is to really be offering something of mutual support to all co-ops of all our members of all different sizes there.
So we've talked about the NFCA's role in sort of supporting some of these smaller startup food co-ops. What for the larger co-ops? What's their why are they engaging?
I think for some of the larger co-ops, part of the appeal is in these sort of regional projects that NFCA wants to be taking on. Things like the Farm to Freezer program, things like things like what else could we be doing in terms of looking at production or distribution on a larger scale, looking at other ways that maybe we can leverage our collective regional impact. I mean, when you talk about sort of the impact of NFCA members as a whole, if you counted up like the members of all the different co-ops, collectively that's something like 90,000 individuals that are on some level represented by NFCA. And I think the figure was all the member co-ops together have an annual revenue of $200 million. And so now we're talking numbers that people pay attention to, when you're talking about sort of ways to look at what's possible in our region.
And so kind of like when thinking about that, that and sort of that scale, what are the sort of being on the board and sort of thinking ahead for this organization? What are there goals? Are there sort of things that in the next, say, 5 years, whatever, that the organization's aiming to achieve, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are. We're still kind of looking for that, that next big project. Like, what else we do beyond something like Farm to Freezer. At our annual meeting yesterday, we had an interesting exercise where everyone was asked to come up with a headline. That in 5 years, what as a result of NFCA, and it was really it's just a sort of a playful exercise, but people were saying things like 5 years from now, co-ops are the fastest growing business sector in New England, or things like X number of new startups, or getting the cooperative model into more universities. Our executive director, Urban Kroll, does teach a course on co-ops at UMass Amherst. But you were mentioning that there really is only kind of a handful of examples of the cooperative model being taught at the university level. And so, maybe that's somewhere where NFCA wants to go, and advocating for that. Another thing that we've been doing is really kind of with our partnerships with other organizations like NOFA and the New England Farmers Union, and kind of looking at policy level and advocacy around cooperatives and food system issues, that that NFCA can kind of be representing our member co-ops as a voice, whereas things like advocacy and policy work might be outside the scope of a co-op who's really trying to just do their job of being a food co-op well and run their store and satisfy their members. But this is a role that NFCA could take on behalf of our members.
So you mentioned this exercise happening at the annual meeting, so that's probably a good segue for us to talk a little bit about. So what did happen? What was the scene there? All these cooperators from around the region coming together to do what? Yeah.
So we New England, we're pretty geographically spread out. There we have co-ops from New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, and so we try to have a gathering twice a year. So we gathered in April, and then this is our next big gathering yesterday. And so it's an update of kind of how NFCA is doing, what we've been up to, sort of the annual report type thing, and then also a chance for member co-ops to just do a lot of brainstorming and learning and different workshops on topics that co-ops might really be struggling with or thinking about or wanting to engage with more. So the format for yesterday was in the morning, we had some of those reports on our activities, and then we had a great presentation by Faye Conti from Hunger Free Vermont, who was really talking about hunger in Vermont, hunger in New England in general. She had I'm sure she has her data on Vermont down pat, but she had taken that one step further to get some of the data on hunger and food insecurity in other New England states as well. And so talking about that and talking about the role that co-ops can play, and how as businesses that our main focus is selling food, and doing so through the cooperative model, co-ops really have a lot of good opportunities and are well situated to really be actors in this issue of food insecurity. So it was a great presentation by Faye in the morning, and then we had some morning discussion groups, some different workshops that people could choose which one to attend. Delicious lunch, and then another session of workshops in the afternoon.
And so on the food insecurity one, so one issue that's come up that has always been, I think, both intriguing and kind of vexing for a lot of food co-op people has been the sort of oftentimes perception of this sort of 70s and 80s way of food co-ops as being in some ways elitist. And I know Emily Kaminsky of Granite City Grocery has when she gave a really interesting talk that was talking about kind of how they've addressed that in her community. Did that discussion come up of ways to sort of make co-ops more kind of culturally accessible to people?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right that is a perception that a lot of our co-ops struggle with, whether it's the co-ops who have been around for a long time, or the co-ops who are just starting and are in the startup phase and don't have a storefront yet, but as they're trying to recruit new members, they're getting asked the question, well, aren't co-ops really expensive? Am I really going to be able to shop there? That sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's a perception that's out there, and I think one of the things that we were really talking a lot about yesterday, and co-ops are talking about this individually as well, is the idea of a healthy food access program, or different strategies for making food more affordable, making shoppers who are not used to shopping at a food co-op feel more welcome in the store, feel like this is a place where I belong, this is a place where I can shop. And so in terms of how we go about addressing that perception of the food being more expensive, there are a lot of different strategies. A lot of it has to do with just education is the bottom line. Whether that's what City Market here in Burlington does, publishing like a market basket study where you go out and have a list of staple items and you compare prices at City Market, at Shaw's and Hannaford and Price Chopper on a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, things like that. So getting that price comparison out there so that people can see that actually in many cases City Market's prices on store brand items are as good or better than some of the other supermarkets. It's things like that. It's things like at City Market we call it the Food for All program. Other co-ops are kind of implementing the same thing with a different name. But the idea of making membership in the co-op more accessible. City Market does that through a 10% discount for anyone who receives WIC, food stamps, Social Security, and there may be one other category that I'm not thinking of right now. But that model of getting shoppers to really think of themselves as members and being able to be members. One of the things that Faye did a great job of pointing out is just the little ways that stores can make people feel more welcome and can really think about things like the idea of why we don't call it food stamps anymore, why it's an EBT card that looks just like any other debit card, is really to preserve the privacy and the dignity of someone who's receiving those benefits, and the person in line behind them at the checkout counter doesn't need to know that. So it's basic things like if your co-op doesn't already accept EBT cards, that's a good place to start. It's member education about how to eat well on a budget, how to use the bulk section for maximum advantage, and that leads into things like cooking classes, making sure that people know how to use raw ingredients that can be a lot less expensive than prepackaged meals. And so there was a lot of talk about programs like City Market's Food for All program, because a lot of different co-ops are looking at that. Whether they are established co-ops that are doing that now. And the thing that was really exciting to me is that there are actually a lot of startups who are talking about just incorporating that sort of thing from day one. Yeah.
That's great. I think City Market in particular does a great job of sort of member education.
Yeah.
So one other thing I'm just wondering is, you said you had this kind of like group that all came together at the meeting, heard this talk, and then sort of broke out into these different sessions. Kind of what were the topics at the meeting? What was covered? The material covered.
Well, let's see. There was in the morning. There was one on GMOs and the GMO labeling and the role that co-ops could be playing in that. There was some talk about regional sourcing projects, sort of what's next for the farm to freezer program or other ideas like that. There were some workshops that were specific to different management issues, sort of a, manager grab bag, come pick the brains of another general manager. What things have you really been struggling with and want some help thinking about? There were some around the Healthy Food Access Program. There was and different pieces of that, some focusing on how do you implement a program like that? Like, how do you make the dollars work? Other people wanted to spend a little bit more time thinking about like marketing and messaging and making co-ops feel welcome. Which can be as easy as having that sticker prominently displayed on the door. We accept 3 Squares Vermont, or the equivalent in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. But really just, so there were some people who, chose to go to a workshop on marketing and messaging and welcoming. Others wanted to focus more on the financial aspects of it. I participated in a workshop that was really looking more at the board side of it, and talking about co-op, like approaching this idea of healthy food access from the level of your ends policies or your mission statement. And whether that's in terms of co-ops who have an existing mission statement and how do we make a healthy food access program fit with that, or should we be explicit in our ends statements about healthy food access? So just kind of that board level of thinking where it's kind of how this fits into the co-op statement of the difference they want to make in the world, and whether you can kind of use the mission that you have and make this healthy food access a reasonable interpretation of those ends, or if it goes the other way around and it's like, this is important to us and it's important enough that we want to rewrite our mission statement to include specific phrases. So it was just a discussion. People were coming at it from a lot of different angles, but those, that's sort of the broad brush of some of the different topics of workshops.
So you mentioned GMOs, and that's been a popular issue in Vermont with around GMO labeling. And what's the NFCA's thinking on the role of co-ops in sort of getting that message out to consumers and their role in sort of playing a part in keeping GMOs, reducing GMOs in sort of the food system?
Well, I think in that workshop, the bottom line that we kind of came down to was that it's really all about education, 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 that co-ops really have a role to educate their members as much as possible about food choices of all kinds, including GMO or not. And also the idea of, right now there's so much ambiguity around GMO labeling, and there are certain products that if it has the non-GMO project label, you can be reasonably certain that it in fact does not contain GMOs. But then there's, I think with that there's so much gray area, or it may be the processing facility that made it might be certain that their ingredients don't have GMOs, but maybe farther on down the food chain some canola oil got in there somehow, and that canola was probably GMO. So it's like, how picky do you want to be about it? How picky can you be? And so I think really what, the common ground there is that co-ops can educate their members as much as possible, that be as transparent as possible about how the co-op is dealing with this question, and really do everything you can to establish relationships that are based on trust, that consumers trust that when their co-op is saying, we're trying to label GMO-free products when we're confident that they are in fact GMO-free. I think one of the themes of that conversation was that it's not about vilifying or demonizing products that can't be labeled GMO-free. It's more about celebrating certain ones that, that can have that label. But I think other than that, I think it's really hard to find absolute common ground, because when you look at the co-ops that are part of NFCA, there are some co-ops who are pretty strictly all natural or all organic. And then there are co-ops like City Market that are a hybrid, and we sell a mix of conventional and organic products. And when you think about what's on the shelves in all these different stores, like, it's just not reasonable to pull entire product lines in some cases because it was discovered that there were some GMO products somewhere in the production chain. Mm-hmm. So I think there, you're like any community that's struggling with a controversial issue, there's going to be a lot of differences of opinion. There's going to be a lot of differences in what any individual co-op is able to do about it. But I think it is fair to say that, co-ops as a whole want to do whatever they can to educate their members, that it's really about consumer choice and helping our members and all of our shoppers, even if they're not members, to be making informed choices about what they're buying.
So one other thing that I was kind of wondering about, just in terms of the association, I don't know if this came up in this particular meeting or if this is something that the association deals with much, but in terms of co-ops having a democratic structure, but oftentimes different co-ops, even if they're very similar in other ways, will sort of implement that differently. Mm-hmm. Does the association facilitate any sort of dialogue about kind of what the best practices of democracy, or how different co-ops do their democratic governance?
NFCA has not had a large role in that in particular. No, I mean, I think that there are, other than sort of the guiding principles around what co-ops are, the cooperative principles and having some allegiance to that sense of democracy. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's there's no prescribed method. There is a governance tool called policy governance that a lot of co-op boards use, but certainly not all of them, and that's okay. So no, NFCA doesn't really have a role in saying how you should be doing the governance process.
So then in the food co-op movement, when mm-hmm. organizations are looking for that, and new organizations are looking for models, mm-hmm. does it tend to be something where they'll find like a mentor organization and sort of see how they do it, and then sort of replicate that, maybe with some tweaks, or? Yeah, no,
and one organization that really plays a tremendous role in that is CDS, the Cooperative Development Services, and they were the folks who interviewed Doug Hoffer in that video earlier. But they're a consulting co-op, and so their work is really to help co-ops, both at the board level and at the management level, think about best practices and think about how to be a really good co-op. So certainly CDS is one great resource that's out there. National organizations like the NCGA, the National Co-op Grocers Association, or NCBA, the National Co-op Business Association. So there is that national level of support of mm-hmm. co-ops in general. And certainly NFCA plays a role in that as well on the more local and regional level. And sort of you were bringing up a National Cooperative Grocers Association. Mm-hmm. Do you want to speak a little bit to the relationship between, so you have kind of individual co-ops, and then you have this kind of regional mm-hmm. Regional organization of cooperative grocery stores, and then mm-hmm. There's this National Cooperative Grocers Association. Kind of what's the relationship between the NFCA and the National Cooperative Grocers? Well, I think the You're talking about a difference of scale, and so you're talking about a different level of being able to have an impact. For example, one thing that NCGA can do at the national level that is certainly beyond our scope is things like sort of a collective buying power, where co-ops who are members of NCGA can participate in mass buying the way Hannaford's or Price Chopper would, because they have chains everywhere. And so that allows co-ops who are members to offer these co-op deals. You know, if you've been in your local co-op recently and seen like a co-op deals flyer, that is through NCGA. And so that leveraging that national level of buying power and allowing co-ops to purchase and sell certain products at a discount, that's something that that you have to kind of be at that national level to do. Whereas NFCA, we kind of see ourselves as filling a gap on that regional level where we're connecting co-ops to each other with things like, New England is still small enough that you can say, oh, you're having a really hard time with this particular aspect of your business, or you're trying to wrap your head around, how do you get from that 1 million mark to that 2 million mark, and what does growth look like? You should call so-and-so, they went through an expansion recently, or this co-op over here has a really good deli setup. You might want to talk to them. You might want to go do a visit. So connecting the dots and connecting co-ops to each other on that level, knowing who's doing what and doing it well, and being able to just put people in touch with each other. That's something that a national organization is just a little too big to really do that effectively, whereas NFCA can do that.
So is NFCA an organization that there are similar sorts of organizations in other regions, or is it kind of unique to New England?
There are, yeah. There's one that I know of in Pennsylvania that is called the Philadelphia Area Co-op Association, PACA, I think. I think there are some in the Midwest. There are a lot of co-ops in the Midwest, so and then you have things like Austin, Texas, which is just one city, but they have an Austin Co-op Business Association as well. In Western Massachusetts, you have something called the Valley Cooperative Business Association, which is different than NFCA in that it's cross-sector collaboration. So they're really focusing on all different types of co-ops that are in their particular area of Western Massachusetts. So yeah, I think it's one of those things that it's beginning to, these kind of regional networks are really beginning to crop up all over the place. And I think there's a lot we can learn from each other, and I think we're seeing that they're growing because there's a need for them, there's a desire for them. And I think that's something that I see continuing to happen in the coming years, is that I can only see more and more of this regional level of thinking about the impact we can have.
In thinking about connecting co-ops, so the NFCA connects food co-ops, but there's clearly a look at the food system as a whole. Does NFCA look at forming alliances between maybe agricultural co-ops and food co-ops? Is that something you guys think about?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the whole organization in terms of yes, this is on our to-do list, but right. Yeah, that is absolutely the kind of thing that we would be looking into, and looking for like-minded partners in our network, whether it's other co-ops in other sectors, whether it's I mentioned NOFA earlier, or the Farmers Union, or anyone else who has sort of a similar interest in seeing a sustainable food system. And NFCA is particularly interested in seeing the cooperative enterprise be a part of that.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so I don't know if there are any other things that from the meeting or impressions or that you'd like to leave us with, or if people want to learn more about the NFCA, what would be the best way to do that?
Well, folks can always go to our website, nfca.coop. We have a Facebook page as well, so certainly checking us out there. I'm sure that very soon some of the slideshows and some of the resources from yesterday's annual meeting will be available on our website soon. So that's definitely a place that people could go for more information.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come in to the show this week.
Thank you.
So you've been watching Cooperative Vermont with Molly O'Brien. I'm Matt Cropp.
And I'm Eric Davis.
So we do this show every 2 weeks. You can if you've missed most of the episode, you can check it out on our YouTube page. It should be up pretty soon, and also our Facebook page, Cooperative Vermont. And this coming Tuesday, again, a reminder, we've got a co-op happy hour at the Laboratory Bee Hackerspace in downtown Burlington. You can go on to laboratorybee.org that has directions, or you can check out our Facebook page that also has all the links that you need to find that. But it'll be a gathering of cooperators from various sectors, sipping on cold beverages, eating some pizza, and talking about the future of our cooperative movement. But until next week, I'm Matthew Cropp.
And I'm Eric Davis.
Good night.